So you don't really need to worry about what your players are concerned about, boundaries, things they don't want to talk about. It's your game as the Dungeon Master, and you can pretty much talk about anything you want. Let's try that again. So there are 5 ways that you can really talk about boundaries. People, things that want to have in the game and don't want to have in the game when it comes to any tabletop role-playing game. But we've got to understand how to bring them to the table. So let's talk about the 5 things that can help us talk about boundaries, things that we don't want to hear at the table as a group. Because sometimes it's the players, sometimes it's the Dungeon Masters that don't want certain topics approached. And these safety tools, there's been some controversy on whether they really help the game or not. I used to think they didn't.
So we took the entire video and we scrapped it because it seemed too trite to do a video about boundaries at the table and try to put it through kind of a 5 tips style filter. The reality is this, is that there's 2 ways to look at boundaries when you're coming at your table. Way number 1 is that as a table, you come together and you discuss them openly. However, that's not a good fit for everyone. Some people have boundaries that they don't want to share, but would like to see just listed on a piece of paper, and then for the table to accept them and just leave them alone. That is completely acceptable as well. You as a Dungeon Master kind of have to read your table. So when you're talking about boundaries and safety tools at a table, there's a couple of tips that I can give you. So the first thing is always reach out to your players beforehand. You as a Game Master or Dungeon Master are required, and I say required, to actually talk about this. Our job as a Game Master, Dungeon Master, is to foster a great playing environment for our players. And some of that has to do with actually creating, a safe environment. So my real advice is to foster a sense of belonging at your table. And you as the Dungeon Master have to communicate this to your players. Players, you have to understand that if you have a Dungeon Master that's not equipped to handling the boundaries that you have, then that's on us as well as players. We have to understand that this is a collaborative story-playing game, and we can't just put everything onto the Dungeon Master. So yeah, there are some tables that we won't feel comfortable playing on, and as a Dungeon Master, there's some players we won't feel comfortable having on our table because reasons. And that has to be okay if you want to foster an environment around your table. So there are certain things, if someone comes in and says, I just don't want to deal with spiders. Well, that's an integral part of my campaign. Give me a fucking break. No, it's not. If someone comes in and has things like don't have pregnancy or small babies in the game, that may seem strange to you, but why would you need to have pregnancies or babies in your game? It can be completely avoided. So things that you may not understand as a boundary as Dungeon Master, that's okay. You can still make those accommodations. You don't have to understand it. And as players, you don't have to understand other players' boundaries. We can simply be respectful of one another. So the tip that I give you for accepting boundaries and finding them is to actually use a boundary-based sheet. Actually send out there and get the people's lines and veils. A line is something that we will not cross, we will not talk about in any way, shape, or form when it comes to our games. A veil is something we'd prefer not to have at the table, but may come up. We as the Dungeon Master should reach out to our players and find out what those are. Then we should ask our players, would you like to discuss these openly or leave them just as me presenting them on a sheet of paper? This is the rules of the table. And then we can respect those individuals. If one person says, I don't want to discuss it, I just want it to be known, then that's how it is for everybody. And there's nothing wrong with that. Safety tools should be used. And I'm not going to do a video on the different types of safety tools out there. I'm simply going to state that we as a community, as Dungeon Masters, should foster a safe space for our players. If you're not willing to do that, then you need to tell your players that so they can choose not to be at your table. And players, if someone's not willing to accommodate your boundaries, understand that they're not required to. Do not be at their table. And I want this to be understanding that I believe that all accommodations should be made the best that we possibly could, but at the same time, I don't want to force anyone's hand. This is a very touchy subject and something that everyone should treat with respect and dignity. I do recommend safety tools. I used to not, and now I do. Now, the way that I do this is I reach out to my players and say, what are the lines of the things you do not want discussed at this table, and what are the things that you would prefer not to? They're called lines and veils. The bottom line is, there's a red line in the sand, and these are the things in the gray fog that I prefer not to discuss. When you put those things together, and then you send out a document, simply stating these are the things that will not be tolerated at our table. You'll be given one warning, then asked to leave the table. Then that's how it is. The thing is boundaries can also change, and we should not assume what people's boundaries are. Whether you're in a group of friends or whether you have a friend of a friend there, I always recommend getting everyone's boundaries and everyone's lines and everyone's veils, so that way you can always adjust accordingly. If you care as a dungeon master, this should be something you're willing to do. You'll be amazed that sometimes as a dungeon master, you may think you know your friends a lot better than you do, and that's okay. So this is something that I recommend us doing every time. We do that before session 0. So at session 0, we can discuss that. I would like to know how you, as a dungeon master and as a players, like to handle the boundaries of a table. Should it be discussed beforehand, openly? I am very much on the side of not openly. So that way people can enjoy the game and don't have to justify what their lines and veils are. That is my personal opinion, and I hope you guys find this useful. I hope to have I have a social contract up, but I hope to have one with safety tools up soon, because I think it's important for us to recognize that. We'll see you guys next time. And again, thank you as always for supporting the channel. This video is a little different just because this one's a subject that we need a little more direct on. So thanks, guys. See you later. So if you stuck around this long, what we've done is we've gone ahead and included the original video at the end of this one. You're more than welcome to watch it, but you have to watch it with kind of a grain of salt, because there's some things that we say in this video that we actually change in the first one, such as I originally talked about talking in an open setting, in an open environment, and discussing the lines and veils. And I realized something, that as I explored this topic, there's a lot of people that don't like to do that. In fact, there's a lot of advice that I give in the minutes to come that really vary from table to table. And I wanted to point that out on the first video. So you're more than welcome, because this advice can help you if this is a new subject or subject you're looking for different perspectives on, because I think that lines, veils, and boundaries are something that we need to explore different perspectives on. So coming up is another 5 minutes about lines and veils and some actual tips that we've used in the past that have helped me create, better spaces at my table. So again, thank you for joining us, and enjoy the next 5 minutes. The first thing when it comes to boundaries at the table is understanding the difference between lines and veils. This was a concept that was introduced to me recently, but I love the distinction. A line is a topic that you don't want approached in any way, shape, or form. A veil is something that will make me unqueasy, or something that we should be aware of that someone at the table may not want to talk about. Now, originally I talked about these lines and veils be given anonymously to the dungeon master. And if you as a table want to give them anonymously, you are more than welcome to doing these things. However, sometimes talking about your lines and veils, if it's a group of friends, is not a bad thing. There are things that your friends may make you uncomfortable on, that this gives us an opportunity to actually talk about things that bother us, things that you may want to share with your friends. Now, if you have a table that's not friends, and this is a business style transaction, such as a pay for play game, lines and veils can simply be exactly what they are. Lines and veils. These are the things we do not talk about. The second thing we kind of have to talk about when dealing with boundaries at a Dungeons and Dragons table is how to gather this information. I personally like to gather everyone's lines, the things they will not cross, the red lines in the sand, and the veils, the things they'd rather not have discussed at the table. I like to gather them before the game, specifically via email, private Discord, text message, or if you got to, snail mail. Haven't used snail mail in a decade or so, but still, nonetheless, I want to gather these informations before the first session so I have access to them. So if I see anything in the game that maybe cause a problem, I can talk to that player. Hey, we're playing a grim, dark, horror-style fantasy that actually has a lot of blood and guts and gore, and that's one of your lines. Maybe this is not the game that you should participate in. Most of my games are themed and generally only last 10 to 15 sessions. I don't have any long-running campaigns, so therefore, excluding someone in one of my games is not a big deal, because there could be another game they're a better fit for. For those of you that are doing long-term campaigns with a group of friends, you might want to discuss those lines and find out a way that you as a dungeon master can actually help them deal with that, or not have it in the game at all. So I like to gather them beforehand. The third thing, once you've gathered them, once you have everyone's lines, once you have everyone's veils, write it down. Put it in front of everyone. This is a sheet. These are the things we do not talk about. These are the things that we will absolutely talk about. These are the things that, we don't want to have, but we're okay with if it comes up once in a blue moon. Write them down, give them to everyone, and sign them. Why would we have people sign them? That seems redundant, Richard. That's ridiculous. Why are you against signing them? The same reason people go, signing them's dumb.
those are the same reasons why we do have people sign them. When you sign them, you're acknowledging the fact that you have read them. You understand that there are certain things on this table we are not going to talk about, and there's some things that make people uncomfortable. If you're unwilling to sign that, think about that. Why would I not be willing to sign the document that tells people at this table that they have my trust, that I'm not going to approach subjects that they don't want to? Why are you against that? Some people say, well, this is a safe space. We should talk about whatever. That's the point. That's the entire point, is that it's not. There are things that we don't want to talk about. So remember, I write them down, I have people sign them, and the people that are refusing to sign them or get mad about it, that tells me something about the players at my table. Whether you like what I'm saying or not, there is merit in the signing of the document. Now, some people won't. Some people will just hand them out and everyone can review them. But the bottom line is, the reviewing of the document is pretty much the same as signing them. You're acknowledging the fact that you're around a group of friends or a group of coworkers or a group of people, and there's certain things that you're not going to discuss at the table. Be aware of that. The fourth thing you want to do when it comes to boundaries and talking about lines and veils and looking at them and putting them on paper, do them even when you think you shouldn't. Meaning, if I have a group of friends that are all getting together for a game, I'm still going to do this. Even though I'm playing with my brother, even though I'm playing with my best friend, even though I'm playing with my significant other, I'm going to do lines and boundaries. You're going to find out real fast that there's things that your friends don't want to talk about, that you may have been really just talking about anyway and kind of being disrespectful and not even knowing it. Knowing that something makes something makes someone so uncomfortable, they're willing to write it down and say, I don't want to talk about this, and you never had a clue. You'll learn more about the people around you, especially if you're accepting. Using safety tools and boundaries to understand where people are coming from and things they don't want to deal with when they're trying to escape reality, there's no negative to that. And it's simply adjustment. Now, mind you, we will make mistakes from time to time depending on what people's lines and veils are, and that's okay as long as we're not doing it intentionally. But we'll get to there in just a second. Number 5, when dealing with boundaries, don't be afraid to say out loud what your lines and boundaries are. Don't be afraid to share them with the table. All too often, especially in the past, the one thing I always told was the dungeon master should gather the lines and gather the veils and gather the boundaries that the entire table has beforehand, put them all on a sheet of paper and not share them. Now, if the party wants to do that, or if a party member has something that they don't feel comfortable talking about but want to put as a line because they want to share at the table, I encourage that as well. And so that's one thing that I do as a dungeon master, is that I'm the trusted figure at that table. And I send an email out. Now it's more text message or Discord, private message saying, hey, is there anything that you want me to add to the lines and veils that you don't want to discuss when it comes time to that? And I'll just say, these are the things that are not allowed at my table, and these are the things to be concerned. And then we can discuss what everyone else's are. I encourage open discussion of what people's lines and veils are so people can understand one another a little bit better. Doesn't mean you have to share why, but understanding whose lines and veils are what does help. This is an optional one. I also just encourage making sure that everyone knows. But a lot of times our lines and veils are things that we don't want to share because we may be ashamed of, we may feel guilty of, we may feel like we shouldn't have that as a line or a veil, or it shouldn't make us uncomfortable. And that's one of those things where if I'm sitting down with a group of friends, I'd like to know that about you. And I hope that the people that you're playing with would as well. If it's a pay-for-play game, maybe not so much. And finally, when it comes to how to talk about boundaries at the D&D table, don't be an asshole. It's that simple. If you have a group of people and there's a line on there and you choose to cross that line, you're doing it maliciously. Now, it's one thing if you accidentally cross or approach that line, but y'all saw it. It was all there. And if you don't, 5 lines, 10 veils, or whatever it may be, you're doing it maliciously. And accidents happen. It's easy to spot the accident. So don't be like, cross the line and be like, oh, I'm so sorry. Or cross the line again. Oh, I keep doing it. Just part of who I am, part of my character. No, it's not. You wrote it down. You reviewed it. Don't be an asshole about this. This is one of those things where this builds trust. When you put lines and veils down on paper and you share them with a group of friends and you all are going through them, the person that crosses it tells us what kind of person you are because you don't care enough about that table to do that. Mistakes happen. There's an exception to every rule that I just went through. There's an exception to all of this. We're not talking about the exceptions. We're talking about a subject that we don't talk about enough because it feels awkward, or we shouldn't have lines, or we should be willing to talk about anything. And the reality is we're playing a game. We're playing a game to escape reality, to escape into a fantasy world where we can play the character we want. And sometimes there's certain things about this real world that we don't want to have to deal with. And there's nothing wrong with that. At the same time, there may be a game where a line is going to be crossed because of the type of game we're playing, specifically horror fantasy, right? Or maybe you're playing a game that's into the erotica side of things. I don't know. Everyone has different lines, everyone has different veils, everyone has different boundaries, and if we don't ever bring them up, we can leave one player feeling uncomfortable and then unwilling to leave because they're feeling ashamed that, hey, this is not the game for me. You guys have gone in a direction that I never thought you would. The thing is, until I started doing these, I didn't realize there were lines that I had. I used to say there's no lines, anything's open for discussion on the role-playing table, and since then, there's a lot of things that make me queasy. I've got more veils than I do lines, but I have my own. I'll share mine with you. So, for example, my lines are very simple. There's no sexual assault and there's no rape in my campaigns. People don't say those things online, but there shouldn't be any explanation of why I don't have them there. There's no need to explore it, and if you want to argue with it, you're not welcome to my table and you're not welcome in my comment section. People will, though. People will argue against any line that you put. Veils, I get queasy when it comes to torture, right? Before I was like, oh, it's just a game. We play evil campaigns. No, not so much anymore. So I don't play evil-based campaigns. In fact, I've had one character that was an evil-based character in a group of good people playing in one of my campaigns, and they teetered on that line, but it was a veil. It wasn't a line. And so I just want to share with you, this is one of my longer videos because this really goes into detail. I wanted to share with you some of the ways and things we can do to actually talk about boundaries at the table and give you some tangible things to go with. In the end, it's your table. And as long as everyone at your table is comfortable, that's what's important. And as a dungeon master, you should encourage all of your players to come to you if they're ever uncomfortable. So just keep that in mind. It's food for thought. Again, thank you for joining us. Like, smash the subscribe button, join us, comment below, tell us what you do to handle lines and boundaries. I don't actually ask you to share your own personal lines or veils because that belongs on your table. But how do you talk about it? How do you encourage your players as dungeon masters to talk about it? And as players, do you feel open at sharing it with your dungeon master, or do you think this needs to be done more? Or is this not done enough? Or is this done too much? Or is there too much emphasis put on it? I would like to know in general. You can see my stance for this video, so comment at your own warning. So guys, thank you again, and we'll see you next time.